Why was she the only one no one spoke to in the briefing room? The table was crowded with maps, red lines, printed photos. The overhead projector hummed, casting shadows across faces that looked tense, tired, hardened. Every officer there wore the weight of years in service. Every man had a voice, a space to interrupt, to argue, to raise objections. She had none. Not because she was forbidden to speak, not officially, but because they didn't expect her to. They pushed her aside without ever touching her. A quiet dismissal, sharper than any insult. She felt it in the way the commander's gaze passed over her, never lingering long enough to invite opinion. She felt it in the way a junior officer leaned forward, cutting across her words when she tried to contribute. She felt it in the silence when she stopped speaking, a silence no one rushed to fill. She sat straighter in her chair, jaw tight, pen tapping against the notepad. Her notes were immaculate, lines of ink underlined twice. She listened harder than anyone in that room, catching every detail, every hesitation in the colonel's voice. But still, she felt like a ghost. It wasn't new. She learned long ago that the military, no matter how modern, carried traditions older than her. And one of those traditions was that soldiers like her, women like her, weren't the ones remembered for strategy. They were remembered for being there, support, secondary, quiet. But she wasn't quiet, not in her heart. The colonel's hand slammed down on the map. Extraction point here. We move at 300, 3 squads in staggered formation. His voice echoed, commanding authority. Intelligence confirms the package is alive, but location is unstable, no margin for error. The package, always called that. Never human, never name, just an asset, just a piece of value hidden behind enemy lines. Her pen stopped tapping. She knew the truth they weren't saying. The one detail buried in intelligence reports that had crossed her desk 3 nights ago, long after the others had gone home. She knew the hostage's name. She knew his history. She knew something the rest of them didn't. And she wasn't going to say it, not yet. The briefing dissolved. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled into folders. The men leaned back, clapping each other on the shoulder, muttering old jokes about long nights and cold rations. She stayed seated, calm, deliberate. Only when the room emptied did she stand. Outside the tent, the desert air bit cold, sharper than expected under the moon. Engines rumbled in the distance, the low growl of armored carriers readying for dawn. She breathed deep, the smell of diesel, dust, and tension filling her lungs. One of the younger soldiers passed her, helmet in hand, eyes darting to the ground. He mumbled, "Ma'am," and walked faster, as if acknowledging her meant breaking some invisible code. She almost smiled. Almost. Her barracks were small, metal walls thin enough to hear the boots outside, the laughter of men trying to shake off nerves with crude stories. She sat on her cot, pulled her hair loose, and let the strands fall heavy over her shoulders. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, reflecting a face she sometimes didn't recognize. 32 years old, 10 years in uniform, 4 deployments, countless missions where she was just support. And yet every scar, every bruise, every long silence between firefights she had carried alone. She traced the line of an old scar on her wrist, not from combat, from training. A mistake, a miscalculation, a moment of weakness punished by metal and gravity. She'd never forgotten the words her instructor had said when she stood back up, bleeding but unbroken. "Daughters don't last long here." That had been 10 years ago. And she was still here. Her hand lingered on her pack, already half prepared. Standard issue rifle, sidearm, radio, compass, a photograph tucked into a sealed plastic bag. The photo she rarely looked at. The one with faces that no longer existed. She closed the bag quickly, too quickly. Footsteps outside. A knock at the metal frame. She didn't answer right away. The door creaked open anyway. Sergeant Vega stepped in, tall, broad, with lines of fatigue around his eyes. He was one of the few who didn't dismiss her outright. Maybe because he'd been around long enough to stop caring about traditions, or maybe because he carried his own ghosts. "You ready?" His voice was low, roughened by sand and cigarettes. She nodded once, "Always." He studied her just for a moment. "They'll follow the colonel, but between you and me," he paused as if the words cost him something, "we both know this one's not in the manual." Her lips pressed into a thin line. He was right. The maps looked neat, the plan polished, but missions never followed neat lines, and there was something else, something in the intelligence files she hadn't told them. "Get some rest," Vega muttered, stepping back out. "It's a long night." But she didn't rest. She lay down, yes, closed her eyes, yes, but her mind moved faster than her pulse. Images flickered in the darkness, the hostage's name printed in black ink, the way it had caught her breath when she first read it. The sudden rush of memory, of voices, of laughter, of a promise made long ago. She whispered into the dark, as if the walls would keep her secret. "I can't lose you again." The alarm broke her thoughts at 200, a shrill reminder that time had run out. She moved with the others, boots pounding gravel, rifles slung, eyes forward. No one looked at her. No one questioned why she was there. She was invisible until proven otherwise. The convoy rolled out under a sky bruised with stars. Engines roared. Dust rose in choking clouds. She sat in the back of the carrier, helmet on, night vision ready. Across from her, two young soldiers laughed too loudly, hiding their fear in bravado. One of them fiddled with his wedding ring, twisting it around his finger, staring at the metal as if it held answers. She wanted to tell him it wouldn't protect him. She wanted to tell him that fear was normal, that even after 10 years it never left, it only settled deeper into the bones. But she stayed quiet. They wouldn't listen. Not to her. Instead, she closed her eyes and remembered his face. The hostage. The reason she hadn't told anyone what she knew. His eyes sharp with conviction. His voice always steadier than hers. A man who had once called her reckless, stubborn, impossible, and yet had trusted her when no one else did. And now he was out there, waiting. The convoy jolted to a halt. A sharp command cut through the night. She opened her eyes, weapons up, boots on dirt, silence heavy as a held breath. The desert stretched wide, endless shadows broken only by the pale glow of the moon. Somewhere out there, behind enemy lines, was the truth she hadn't spoken. She tightened her grip on the rifle. The mission had begun. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. What was it about silence that felt louder than gunfire? They moved in a staggered line, boots sinking into the sand, each step measured, each breath visible in the thin night air. The convoy had left them 2 clicks back. Vehicles couldn't risk drawing attention this close to the target zone. From here, it was only shadows, nerves, and the weight of whatever they carried inside themselves. She stayed near the middle of the formation, close enough to observe, far enough not to lead. The colonel marched ahead, shoulders squared, rifle angled low, every move broadcasting authority. Men followed without question, eyes locked forward, minds clinging to the plan drawn on paper. But she knew better. Paper didn't bleed, people did. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke. Her eyes flicked left, scanning the ridge, just rocks and sand, but smoke meant fire. Fire meant life or death. She slowed, falling half a step behind. Her breath steadied, heartbeat climbing. Something in the pit of her stomach whispered a warning. She learned to listen to that voice. 10 years of missions had taught her that instincts weren't weakness. They were survival. "Pick it up, Lieutenant." The colonel's voice snapped like a whip without turning back. Her jaw tightened. She adjusted pace, said nothing. A hand brushed her elbow lightly, Vega at her flank. His eyes caught hers in the pale light. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He'd seen it too. The smell, the unease. He trusted her instincts even if the colonel didn't. Minutes stretched. Every crunch of boots in sand echoed like thunder. Then a sound, small, fragile. A metallic click. Her breath froze. Down, she hissed, barely above a whisper. The words were swallowed by the wind, too soft, too late. The explosion tore the night apart. Sand and fire erupted, the shockwave slamming her chest, ripping the breath from her lungs. She hit the ground hard, grit biting her cheek, ears ringing with a piercing high scream. Dust clouded everything, turning men into shadows, shouts into muffled roars. Her fingers dug into the earth, forcing her body to move. She rolled, coughed, blinked through the haze. Shapes staggered. One man lay screaming, leg twisted, blood pouring dark across pale sand. Another didn't scream at all. The colonel barked orders, voice ragged. Form perimeter, eyes on the ridge. She crawled, dragging herself toward the nearest wounded. The young soldier with the wedding ring. His chest heaved, eyes wide with animal panic. Shrapnel had torn through his arm, blood poolsing bright. Her hands worked fast, steady, practiced. Tourniquet high, tighten, pull, knot. He gasped, teeth chattering, breath shallow. "You're okay," she said, voice low, calm against the chaos. "Stay with me, just stay." But his eyes didn't look at her. They darted past, searching for someone else, anyone else. She swallowed the sting in her chest and pressed harder on the wound. Gunfire cracked from the ridge. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Shadows moved fast, precise. They'd been waiting. She ducked low, dragging the soldier with her, using her body as shield. Bullets spat dust inches from her helmet. Vega's voice cut through the gunfire, commanding, pulling men into formation, returning fire. And still the colonel barked orders like it was a drill. Push forward, push, don't stop. Forward into the ambush, her teeth ground. The plan on paper had collapsed with the first explosion, but he couldn't see it, or wouldn't. Another burst of fire, another scream. She tasted blood, not hers, not yet. Her rifle pressed cold against her palms. She peeked up, sight locked on the ridge. A shadow shifted. Breath steady, finger curled, she fired. The shape dropped. Silence for a heartbeat. Her chest rose, fell. Adrenaline burned sharp. The soldier beside her groaned, fatting. She pressed the tourniquet tighter, whispered again, softer this time. "Don't quit, not now." But her eyes were elsewhere, searching the ridge, scanning the horizon, waiting for the next strike. The firefight stretched minutes into forever. Then, sudden quiet. A lull heavy enough to suffocate. Only the crackle of fire from burning gear, only the broken cries of the wounded. She lifted her head, scanning. Nothing moved, no muzzle flashes, no shadows, just desert again. The colonel stood tall, brushing sand from his uniform as if the earth itself had dared to touch him. "We keep moving," he growled. "Leave the dead. Secure the objective." Her stomach turned. She looked at the bodies, men she'd eaten beside hours ago. Their faces were pale in the moonlight, eyes unblinking, dust clinging to their lashes. Leave them. Her throat burned, words rising. She wanted to shout, to demand they carry them back, that no soldier deserved to be left in the dirt like forgotten gear. But she didn't. Not yet. She rose instead, rifle slung, pulling the wounded soldier to his feet with Vega's help. Together they moved, slow, dragging him along the line. Every step was heavier now. The mission no longer began. It was already bleeding. And still she said nothing of what she knew. Nothing of the name etched in her memory, the hostage whose face haunted her dreams. She couldn't risk it yet. If the colonel dismissed her now, they'd lose him forever. Hours blurred. The desert stretched merciless. Men limped, whispered curses, clenched jaws. Vega's shadow stayed near hers, silent but steady, like an anchor in shifting sand. Finally, a shape appeared against the horizon. A building, half-collapsed, broken spine of concrete and rebar jutting into the sky. The target. The colonel lifted his hand, fist closed. Halt. The squad crouched low, breaths ragged, nerves raw. She scanned the building through night vision. Windows gaping like wounds, walls charred black. Silent, too silent. Vega leaned close, his whisper barely air. "Doesn't feel right." She nodded once, Because it is. The colonel didn't wait. He motioned forward, signaling squads to split breach from two sides. Orders sharp, movements rehearsed, like this was still just a plan. Her pulse thudded, each beat louder than the last, because inside that building was the truth she hadn't spoken aloud, a truth that could break her or save him. She tightened her grip on the rifle, breath steady, eyes locked on the dark doorway. And then faint, too faint for the others, she heard it, a sound drifting from the broken walls, a cough, weak, human, alive. Her chest seized, her throat closed. She knew that sound, knew it like memory. The colonel barked, "Move." Boots thundered forward, men raised rifles, shadows swallowed them whole. She followed, heart breaking, fists clenched, into the building where past and present were about to collide. And there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Why did her legs tremble the moment she stepped inside? The building swallowed them whole. The air was heavier, hotter, laced with smoke and something metallic. Blood, old and drying, clung to the walls in streaks. Concrete dust drifted with each bootfall, catching in the beam of their night vision goggles. Every sound was amplified. The click of rifles, the hiss of radios, the nervous swallow of young soldiers who tried not to breathe too loudly. She moved with the others, eyes scanning the jagged corners, rifle tucked firm into her shoulder. Training kept her precise, methodical, but beneath it, her chest tightened, each step dragging weight that no one else carried. The cough had come from here. She hadn't imagined it, she couldn't have. The colonel raised a hand. The squad fanned out, sweeping through the husk of rooms. Shards of glass crunched under boots. A door creaked open, hinges rusted, revealing only shadows. Her heartbeat thudded louder with each cleared hallway. She wanted to run, to tear through walls until she found him, but she forced herself steady, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Room clear. 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 But not clear enough. A sound again, softer this time, not a cough, a whisper, words she couldn't make out. She froze, tilted her head. The others kept moving. She stayed, listening. The whisper again from below, faint, ragged. Her boots carried her to a cracked staircase, half collapsed, leading down into darkness. She hesitated, rifle angled toward the void. The colonel barked behind her, "Lieutenant, stay with formation." Her mouth opened, closed. She should obey, shouldn't break, but the whisper pulled at her chest like a wire hooked deep inside. Vega caught her eye, a flicker of silent understanding. He motioned with his chin, small, subtle, "Go." Her breath steadied. She moved down, each step creaking, threatening to give way. The air grew colder, damper. Her goggles adjusted, painting the basement in ghostly green. And then she saw him. At first just a shape slumped against the wall, hands bound, head bowed. Her chest seized. She knew the line of those shoulders, the cut of that jaw, even under grime and bruises. It was him. Her throat closed around his name, almost spilling into the dark, but she swallowed it down hard, forcing only air through her lungs. She dropped to her knees, fingers trembling as she checked his pulse. Weak, but there. His skin burned hot, fever climbing. His lips moved, cracked, whispering. She leaned close. "Thought you forgot." Her eyes burned. 10 years of walls cracked in a heartbeat. "I never forgot," she whispered back. But before she could cut his restraints, boots thundered above. Shouts, gunfire exploding again. The colonel's voice echoed down. "Contact, we've got contact." Her chest twisted. They'd been lured. This wasn't rescue, it was trap. She yanked her blade, slicing rope, catching his weight as he sagged into her arms. He was lighter than memory, too light. "We're leaving," she hissed, though her heart screamed questions. How was he here? Why hadn't they told her? Why had intelligence buried the truth of him in this file? He coughed, blood flecking his lips. His eyes opened, hazy but sharp enough to find hers. And in that look a storm, recognition, regret. and something else, the weight of 1,000 words unsaid. Before either could speak, a grenade clinked against concrete nearby. Her body moved before thought. She shoved him down, curling around him, arms locking tight. The blast shook the walls, dust raining, ears ringing. Pain shot across her side, but she didn't loosen grip, not until silence returned. She pulled him up, breath ragged. He groaned, stumbling, legs barely holding. She threw his arm across her shoulders, bearing his weight as if it were nothing. Gunfire closer now, shadows flooding stairwell. She raised her rifle, firing blind into the smoke, dragging him up each broken step. Her teeth clenched against the weight, her body screaming, but she didn't stop, couldn't. Vega appeared at the landing, face smeared with soot, rifle blazing. "Move," he barked. Together they hauled him out, bullets tearing chunks from walls. Men shouted, chaos splintering formation. The colonel's voice cut through it all. "Leave him, we secure position first." Her chest ignited with fury. She turned, eyes blazing. "He's the mission," she snapped, louder than she'd meant, sharper than any blade. For the first time, silence fell around her. Soldiers froze, eyes cut toward her, toward him, recognition dawning in fragments. The colonel's jaw tightened, his gaze burned with something ugly. "You knew." She didn't answer, not with words, only tightened her grip, hauling the man she'd once loved closer, shielding him with her body. Gunfire erupted again, snapping the moment in half. Vega pushed forward, covering them, voice hoarse with command. "Fall back now." The squad obeyed, reluctant, stumbling, bleeding, but obeying. They crashed through the building's skeleton, out into the desert night. Every step was fire, every breath knives. She dragged him, half-carried him, her muscles screaming. He whispered against her shoulder, words she could barely catch. "It shouldn't have come." Tears blurred her eyes. "You think I'd let them bury you here?" The colonel's rage was a shadow behind them. Orders barked, bitter and sharp. He hadn't wanted this, hadn't planned for him. And she hadn't told them, not until it was too late. The night swallowed them again. The desert stretched wide, endless, merciless. But she held him up, step by step. And though the mission was unraveling, though trust was broken, though the cost was already blood-soaked, she knew one truth sharper than any bullet. She hadn't stepped into this night as just a soldier. She stepped into history as a daughter of unbroken service. And this was only the beginning. How long could a single night stretch? They stumbled across the desert, silence broken only by labored breaths and the crunch of boots on gravel. The moon had sunk lower, shadows longer, cold seeping into sweat-soaked uniforms. Every man carried a weight heavier than his gear, grief, exhaustion, the echo of gunfire still ringing in ears. She carried more. His weight pressed into her side, arm hooked across her shoulders, body limp but stubbornly alive. Each step jarred her bones, but she refused to falter. Her muscles trembled, lungs burned, but she held him as though letting go would mean erasing 10 years of promises. Behind them the squad stretched thin. Some limped, some staggered with fresh wounds, faces pale in moonlight. One soldier dragged his comrade's pack, the comrade himself left behind under collapsing walls. The dead were always heavier when not carried. The colonel walked at the front, stiff, rigid, as if pretending none of it had slipped beyond control. His jaw was stone, his silence sharp. He had lost men, lost formation, lost control of the mission. And he blamed her. She felt it in the way his shoulders squared tighter when she shifted behind him. Felt it in the glance he threw back, a quick, sharp, accusing. Vega stayed close to her flank, not speaking, not questioning, just there. His presence was an anchor, steady in the chaos. He had seen enough nights like this to know words only scraped raw wounds deeper. The man she carried stirred, a soft groan pressed into her shoulder. She glanced down, whispering low, "Stay with me." His voice was faint, cracked by thirst and fever. "You shouldn't have come." Her throat burned. The desert blurred for a moment before she blinked it clear. and leave you here." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but strength failed. His head dropped against her shoulder, eyes slipping shut. She adjusted her grip, tightening her hold. She remembered another night years ago. Rain, not sand. He stood in a doorway, soaked to the bone, telling her she was reckless, impossible, too stubborn to survive in uniform. And yet he had smiled, proud in a way words hadn't captured. Now he was broken in her arms, and she was all he had left. A sudden shout broke the silence. One of the young soldiers ahead raised a hand. The column halted, guns lifted, bodies tensing. She lowered him carefully onto the sand, crouched low, rifle ready, eyes scanning the horizon. Shapes moved ahead. Not shadows, vehicles, 3 of them. No headlights, engines rumbling low, crawling across the desert like predators stalking prey. Her chest tightened, too close, too soon. The colonel hissed into radio, words sharp, clipped. "Incoming patrol, positions." They scattered, sinking low into sand, bodies pressed flat. She shielded him with her body, one hand gripping her rifle, the other steadying his chest. His breath came shallow, uneven, but still there. The vehicles rolled closer. She could see silhouettes now, enemy soldiers mounted on turrets, scanning the dunes. Her finger brushed the trigger, breath frozen. Then, without warning, the colonel raised his fist. She blinked. Was he? His hand dropped, the signal to engage. Gunfire ripped the silence apart. Her heart sank, too soon, too exposed. The desert erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the night. Bullets tore sand inches from her face. She pressed down harder, shielding him, firing bursts toward the closest turret. Men shouted, cried out. Another soldier collapsed, clutching his throat, blood spilling fast. Vega dragged him back, hand pressed to the wound, cursing under his breath. The colonel shouted commands, voice hoarse, rage more than reason. It wasn't working. They were outnumbered, pinned in the open. Her chest heaved. Fury burned. This wasn't strategy. This was arrogance. She turned, shouting over the chaos. "We fall back to cover." The colonel snapped toward her, face twisted. "You don't give orders, Lieutenant." Her blood boiled. Another burst of fire forced her flat, grit biting her cheek. She looked at the man she carried, pale, weak, barely conscious. Then she looked at the soldiers bleeding into the sand, their eyes wide with fear. No, she wouldn't let them die here. Her voice rose, sharp, cutting through gunfire. Smoke now. For a heartbeat, hesitation. Then Vega's hand moved, pulling a canister free, striking it, tossing it wide. Thick plumes burst, rolling white clouds across the desert. "Move," she barked. And they did, not because of rank, because of survival. They scrambled back, dragging wounded, firing blind into the smoke. She hauled him again, teeth clenched, legs burning. Bullets cut the air, but the cover was just enough. They stumbled into a shallow ravine, bodies collapsing against rock. Heartbeats thundered. Hands shook. Silence finally crept back, broken only by groans and gasps. The colonel stormed toward her, face pale with fury. "You disobeyed a direct order." She met his eyes, voice steady, sharp. "I saved their lives." The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Men shifted, eyes flicking between them. Some nodded, just barely. The colonel's jaw clenched. He didn't answer, he couldn't. She turned away, kneeling beside him again. His eyes fluttered open, finding hers through the haze. A ghost of a smile tugged his lips. "Still reckless," he rasped. Her throat tightened. She brushed dirt from his face, whispering, "Still here." For a moment, the world shrank to just them. Then a soldier's sob broke it. One of the younger men, his hands red, pressing against a comrade's wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. He's not," his voice cracked, shattering. She looked, the man's chest was still, his eyes glassy. The younger soldier shook him, voice rising, desperate. "Wake up, come on, wake up." Her chest ached. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him what no one ever tells you before your first death in the field. that it never feels real, that you'll spend years expecting him to walk back into the room, that the silence of absence is louder than any explosion. But she said nothing, some lessons only silence teaches. The colonel finally spoke, voice hoarse. "We move at dawn, rest, patch what you can." Rest, as if rest were possible here. She pulled him closer to the rock wall, easing him down gently. His eyes closed again, body trembling with fever. She stripped her pack, digging for water, pressing the bottle to his lips. "Small sips," she whispered. He obeyed barely. Vega crouched beside her, eyes scanning the horizon. His voice was low, careful. "You knew him." Her chest tightened. She didn't answer. "Not just knew," Vega added, not a question but a statement. Her hands stilled. The desert was quiet. Finally, she whispered, "Before the uniform, before all this." Vega studied her a long moment, then nodded once. No judgment, just understanding. She looked at him again. At the man who had once been her future, now clinging to life in her arms. She hadn't told them, not the colonel, not the squad, not anyone. And she wondered, not for the first time, if silence would save them or destroy them. Why did silence weigh heavier than the gunfire? It pressed against her ribs like a hand she couldn't push away. The compound lay still now. Smoke curled from broken windows. A wall had collapsed inward, leaving shadows where an ambush had once lived. The others were scattered across the perimeter, searching, checking, clearing. But she remained where she was, still breathing in the last echoes of the firefight. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't even the adrenaline. It was something else, something that stuck. She crouched near the broken courtyard where one of the hostiles had fallen. His rifle lay at an angle, half buried in dust. A smear of blood reached out like a hand across the concrete. She stared at it longer than she should have, longer than any soldier was supposed to. Behind her, footsteps approached. "You good?" Sergeant Cole's voice was softer now. No bark, no command, just a man who'd also walked through too much of this. She didn't turn right away. She let the silence stretch, her throat catching against words she didn't want to admit. Then finally she whispered, "He couldn't have been older than 19. Cole stepped closer, standing beside her. He didn't look at the body, he didn't have to. "They make choices too," he said, "same as us." But she shook her head almost imperceptibly. The face on the ground wasn't the enemy she'd been trained to hate. It was just a boy with hollow cheeks and a chipped dog tag still clutched in his fist. She thought of her brother again. Same age, same stubborn fire. And once more the old question returned, louder now. What was she doing here? She wasn't supposed to say it aloud. Not in this world. Not in front of Cole or the team or anyone. But the weight of it was crawling up her chest, and she knew it would come out eventually, whether in words or in the way her hands shook when no one was looking. "Check the east wing," Cole said finally, letting her off the hook. His tone had shifted back to business. Orders again, safe ground. She nodded, standing, brushing the grit from her knees. But she carried that boy's face with her as she moved toward the ruins. The east wing was colder. No flames, just concrete blown apart by the breach. Broken doors leaned against walls like wounded shoulders. Every step echoed too loud, her boots crunching over debris. She flicked her light across the dark corridor. Shadows stretched thin, and for a moment she thought she saw movement, too quick, too sharp. She froze, heart hammering. Her hand hovered above her rifle. She waited. Then a sound, soft, shaky. Not the shuffle of boots, not the metallic click of a weapon, something else. She lifted her light again, slowly. And there they were. Two civilians huddled in a corner, eyes wide, hands clutching each other. A woman, maybe mid-30s, shielding a young girl against her chest. Dust coated their hair. Their clothes were torn, burned at the edges. But their eyes were alive, darting like birds against a cage. The girl's stare locked onto her rifle first, then her face. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared, frozen, like prey waiting to see if the predator would strike. Her chest tightened. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said softly. The words felt too thin in the broken silence. "You're safe now." The woman didn't move, didn't blink. She held her daughter tighter, as if her grip alone could stop the world. Behind her, more footsteps approached, heavy, firm. It was Ramirez this time, his shadow stretching into the corridor. "What do we got?" he asked. "Civilians," she answered. He stepped forward, rifle still angled low, his eyes scanning. "Command'll want them secured, safe extraction." She nodded, but something in her wouldn't settle. She crouched, lowering herself to the girl's height. Slowly, carefully, she set her rifle on the ground beside her. A risk, a gesture, one her training would have questioned. But she needed the girl to see her face, not her weapon. The girl blinked. For the first time her lips parted, not words, just a sound, a whisper of breath. "Water," she murmured. Her throat caught. She pulled the canteen from her vest, unscrewing the cap with trembling fingers. She extended it, hands steady, voice softer than she'd ever spoken in uniform. The woman hesitated, eyes flicking from the soldier to the canteen. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her hands shook as she pressed it to her daughter's lips. And in that moment, just for a moment, the war outside the walls felt distant. Not gone, never gone, but distant enough to remember why she was here. "Move them out," Ramirez said. His tone was firm, practical, but even he couldn't mask the crack in it. She stood again, collecting her rifle, but her eyes stayed on the girl as they led them down the corridor. Step by step, the child's gaze lingered back at her until the shadows swallowed her completely. When she emerged into the night air again, the stars had returned above the compound. The firefight had ended hours ago, but the smoke still lingered. She looked up at the sky, at the distant pinpricks of light, and thought of home. Her mother used to say the stars carried stories, that when people were gone, they became something you could still point to, something that would never burn out. Her brother had believed that too. And now, under the weight of the night, she wondered if he had already become one. "Eagle to command," Cole's voice broke through her thoughts over comms. "Compound secure, civilians recovered, minimal casualties on our side." The words sounded clean, efficient, like boxes checked on a clipboard, but she knew the truth was never that simple. The truth was blood on concrete. The truth was a boy's face that wouldn't leave her mind. The truth was a girl asking for water in a place where nothing should grow. Later, when they regrouped near the extraction point, she sat apart from the others. Not because she didn't want their company, but because she didn't know how to share the storm inside her without unraveling completely. The others laughed softly, voices rough with exhaustion but laced with relief. Ramirez told a story about home, about the smell of fried plantains his grandmother used to make. Even Cole cracked a smile at something, though it faded quickly. She listened but didn't join in. Instead, she thought of her brother again, of how he used to sit with their mother late into the night, telling her things no one else ever knew. He had been her voice when she didn't have one. He had seen her, even when the world pushed her aside. Now it was her turn to carry his silence. When the extraction bird finally arrived, its rotors thundering through the night, she rose with the others. Dust swirled around them, stinging her eyes. The civilians boarded first, mother clutching daughter tight, eyes darting with fear and gratitude all at once. As she climbed in after them, the girl's gaze met hers one final time. No words, just a look. And somehow it was enough. The helicopter lifted, pulling them away from the compound, away from the smoke, away from the ghosts left behind. But as the ground disappeared beneath her, she knew the weight wouldn't vanish with it. Some ghosts follow you home. And tonight she carried more than one. The silence inside the cabin pressed down again. Heavy, familiar, but she didn't fight it anymore. She let it in. Because she knew this was only the beginning. Why did the quiet after victory feel more dangerous than the fight itself? She asked herself that as the helicopter blades thundered above, cutting through the heavy night. The compound shrank into nothing below them, but the silence in the cabin was alive, breathing, waiting. Across from her, the civilians clung together, mother and daughter, fragile as glass. Their eyes darted with every shake of turbulence. Ramirez leaned back, his eyes closed, though she doubted he was asleep. Cole sat near the hatch, watching the horizon like it might break open any second. And she sat alone, always a little apart, always carrying something the others couldn't see. Her rifle rested against her knee. Her gloves were streaked with soot, but it wasn't her hands that felt heavy. It was her chest. The boy's face still burned behind her eyelids. 19, maybe younger. She could still hear her own voice saying he was just a kid. She could still feel Cole's silence answering back. When they landed at forward base, dawn had already started breaking. The light was thin, pale, almost reluctant. The desert stretched out endless in every direction, painted in ash and amber. Soldiers moved quickly across the landing zone, guiding the civilians away, unloading supplies, shouting orders. The world turned practical again. She followed her team through the dust, boots crunching, head low. A briefing would come. Debrief, intel check, maybe another assignment before sleep. Always another assignment. Always one more thing before the weight could settle. But the commander's face was waiting. Stern, lined with exhaustion. He pulled Cole aside, voice low, sharp, papers shuffled, maps spread across the hood of a vehicle. She hung back, her throat dry. She wanted rest, a breath, something simple, but she knew that look. It wasn't over, not yet. When Cole turned back to them, his jaw was tight. "Pack light," he said. "We move again in 2 hours." No one groaned. No one argued, just silent acceptance. That was the way of it. But something in her cracked. 2 hours, after everything. After the boy, after the civilians, after carrying ghosts into the sky. 2 hours and then back into the fire. She wanted to shout, to tell them she wasn't made of steel, that she wasn't the silent machine they thought she was. But the words didn't leave her throat. They never did. Instead, she found herself staring at the girl they'd rescued. She was sitting on a bench near the med tent, clutching a blanket, her eyes scanning the sky as if it might drop another war on her head. The mother sat beside her, silent, watching soldiers pass with a mix of fear and disbelief. The girl caught her staring. Their eyes met again. And in that moment she remembered something she hadn't thought of in years, her first day at academy. She had been younger than most, overlooked, dismissed. Men twice her size laughing quietly, not out loud but under their breath, the kind that cuts deeper. She had sat alone on that bench too, clutching her pack, staring at the floor. No one had looked her way then. Not until her brother showed up at the fence, sneaking past regulations, grinning like an idiot, telling her she could do it. That she didn't have to be louder than them. She just had to stay. Stay. The memory hit her harder than she expected. She blinked fast, forcing it back. When she joined the others again, Cole gave her a look, not harsh, just steady. "You holding up?" She nodded too quickly. "Fine." The lie tasted bitter. 2 hours passed in a blur of gear checks and whispered conversations. Ramirez muttered about the mission, about how command never let them breathe. Someone joked darkly about the food packs. Laughter, thin and tired, cracked the air. She barely heard them. Her mind kept circling the boy, the girl, her brother, all tangled together in a knot that wouldn't loosen. When the convoy rolled out, the desert sun was climbing high, painting the world in sharp white heat. The hum of engines filled the silence. Dust curled behind them in long trails. Their next objective lay miles deeper into the borderlands, a suspected weapons cache. Intelligence suggested high-value material, maybe even connections to the network funding the insurgency. Another target, another mission, another ghost waiting with its name already carved. Hours passed. The heat pressed in. She kept scanning the horizon, her rifle across her lap, her body tense with every jolt of the vehicle. Then, without warning, a crack sharp, loud. The convoy screeched to a halt. Dust choked the air. "Contact!" someone shouted. Bullets snapped past, hitting metal, sparking off the road. The world shattered into chaos. She ducked low, heart hammering. The air filled with smoke and sand. Cole barked orders, his voice cutting through the gunfire. She slid from the vehicle, hitting the dirt hard, rifle snapping into her hands. She scanned the ridge, eyes burning, searching for the source. Figures flickered against the rocks, shadows moving fast, disciplined. Not chaos, training. Another burst rattled overhead. Ramirez shouted, "Right flank." She swung toward the sound, squeezing the trigger. The rifle kicked back, sharp, steady. One shadow fell, another ducked, but they weren't retreating. They were pressing. Her breath quickened, sweat stinging her eyes. She crawled behind a wrecked tire, her shoulder slamming against the metal. Dirt sprayed as bullets chewed into the ground inches away. And then silence. Not full silence, but the lull, the pause between storms. Her pulse raced, her chest heaved. That was when she heard it. A voice faint, behind the rocks, not orders, not commands, something else. Crying. She froze. It wasn't the cry of a soldier, it was small, fragile, a child. Her stomach dropped. What was a child doing here, in the middle of a firefight? Her finger trembled against the trigger. Her mind spun. She glanced at Cole, at Ramirez, at the others crouched behind cover. None of them had heard it, or maybe they had and they pushed it away the way soldiers are trained to push. But she couldn't. She slid lower, pressing her cheek into the dirt, listening. The crying came again, soft, broken. Her brother's voice filled her head, uninvited. Stay. Her grip tightened. She had a choice. She could ignore it, keep firing, stay alive, follow orders. Or she could follow that sound. The sound that didn't belong here. The sound that wasn't supposed to exist in a battlefield. Her throat tightened. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Her pulse thudded so loud she could barely hear. "Cover me," she whispered into comms. Cole's voice snapped back instantly. "Negative, hold your position." But she was already moving. She crawled low, keeping her rifle tight, every muscle tense. Bullets cracked overhead, chewing into the rocks, but she kept going, inch by inch, toward the sound. And then she saw him. A boy, younger than the one in the compound. Maybe 8, maybe 9. His face streaked with dust and tears. He crouched between the rocks, hands over his ears, eyes shut tight. No weapon, no threat. Just a child caught in someone else's war. Her chest clenched. The gunfire picked up again. Dust rained over them as bullets struck the ridge. The boy screamed, curling smaller, trembling. She dropped her rifle, pulling him close, shielding his body with hers. The world thundered around them. And for the first time since she'd put on the uniform, she didn't think of orders. She didn't think of duty. She thought of her brother. And she thought of what it meant to stay. How far could one choice reach? She felt the weight of it in her arms as she crouched against the rocks, shielding the boy with her body. The firefight raged around them. Dust bit at her eyes, grit filled her teeth, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The child trembled, his small frame pressed against her vest, his fists balled into the fabric. His tears streaked her sleeve, hot against the cold edge of fear. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence screamed louder than the rifles. Over comms, Cole's voice cut through, sharp, urgent. "Where the hell are you? You're out of position." She pressed her back harder against the rocks, shielding the boy as another burst tore across the ridge. She wanted to answer. She wanted to say she wasn't abandoning them, that she was still part of the fight. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Ramirez's voice followed, lower, tense. "Cole, we're exposed here. We need her suppressing fire." Suppressing fire. Orders, structure. The clean words that wrapped chaos into something bearable. But none of that could touch the reality in her arms. A boy who didn't belong here, whose cry had cut through the noise like a blade. "Stay down," she whispered to him, though she knew he didn't understand her language. Her tone carried enough. Gentle, firm, protective. The child's sobs slowed just enough for her to hear the shift in the fight. The enemy fire wasn't wild, it was measured, covering movements. They were trained, organized. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was a trap. Her gut twisted. Cole's voice again. "Fall back to the line now." But she stayed frozen, pinned not by bullets but by conscience. Her training screamed one thing. Her heart screamed another. The boy's small hand clutched her wrist suddenly, holding tighter than his size should allow. His grip was desperate, a silent plea. Something in her broke open. She pressed her calms. "I've got a civilian, a child." Silence answered first, a pause that stretched. Then Cole, his tone clipped, angry but not at her, at the situation. "Damn it, get him back, fast, we'll cover." Her throat tightened with relief. For a moment she thought he would order her to leave the boy, pretend he wasn't there. Soldiers had done it before. She had read the reports. But Cole wasn't that man, not today. "Ramirez, right side suppression," Cole barked. "Give her space." Gunfire erupted again, louder, angrier. Dust exploded around them. She cradled the boy tighter, whispering nonsense, soft syllables, as if the sound of her voice alone could build a wall around him. Then she moved. Low, fast, every step a prayer. She kept her body over his, feeling every bullet whip too close, every crack of stone, every burn of heat across her neck. The world shrank to one path, out, just out. When she broke from the rocks, Ramirez's rifle thundered above her, drawing fire away. Cole's voice guided through the chaos, firm, relentless, steady. She trusted it, even as her legs burned and her lungs screamed. And somehow they made it. She slid behind the burned-out truck at the convoy line, pulling the boy with her. Soldiers closed in, eyes wide, hands reaching. One medic dropped to his knees instantly, checking the child, murmuring comfort in broken phrases. Only then did she let go. Her arms felt empty, her chest hollow. She leaned against the metal, breathing hard, her hands shaking for the first time. Cole appeared, crouching beside her, his face streaked with dust and sweat. His eyes burned, not with anger, not with reproach, with something heavier. "You nearly got yourself killed," he said, his voice low. She met his gaze. "He's alive." Cole exhaled, a sound caught between relief and frustration. Then he nodded once, curt, before standing again. The fight wasn't over. The enemy was pulling back, regrouping. They knew now, this convoy wasn't as easy a target as they thought. She pushed herself upright, forcing the tremor out of her legs. Her rifle felt heavier in her hands, heavier but steady. She took her place again, shoulders squared. The boy's cries faded behind her, swallowed by the medic's calm words. She didn't look back. She couldn't, not yet. The battle pressed on. More bursts of fire, more shouted commands, the air thick with heat and grit. Hours felt like minutes. Minutes felt like years. When it finally ended, when the last shadow slipped from the ridge and the silence returned, it was not victory that filled the air. It was exhaustion. They had held barely. The convoy rolled again, slower this time, battered but unbroken. Dust swallowed the road behind them. She sat inside, helmet off now, sweat dripping down her temples. The boy lay wrapped in a blanket near the medic, asleep despite the rattling engine. His face, even in sleep, was tight with fear. Ramirez broke the silence first, his voice rough. "You've got instincts, I'll give you that. Nearly suicidal instincts." She didn't answer. Cole, from the front, said nothing at all. But she could feel the weight of his silence pressing against her like a second shadow. Her own thoughts spiraled. She should have followed orders. She should have stayed in line. But if she had, the boy would be gone. Another nameless casualty, written in the margins of a report no one read. Her brother's voice returned to her again, quiet, insistent. Stay. She stared at her hands, dirt ground deep into the lines of her palms. She wondered how many lives those hands had held now, some pulled back, some lost forever. When they reached the forward post, the sun was low again, bleeding orange across the horizon. Soldiers unloaded, checked gear, tended wounds. The boy was carried gently into the med station, his blanket slipping, his fingers twitching in restless sleep. She lingered near the vehicle, watching him disappear inside. Something in her wanted to follow, to make sure he woke to a face he recognized. But she didn't move. Cole approached her quietly. His shadow stretched across the sand. For a long time he said nothing. Just stood there looking at her, the same way he had back in the compound, measuring, weighing. Finally he spoke. You know why they push you aside sometimes? She blinked, startled. It's not because you're not good enough, he said. It's because they don't know what to do with someone who doesn't fit the mold. You're different, and different scares people. She swallowed hard, throat dry. He glanced toward the med station, then back at her. But today, that difference saved a life. The words hit her deeper than she expected. They weren't praise, not exactly, but they were acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was rarer than medals. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. Cole's expression softened for a heartbeat before hardening again. Get some rest. We move at dawn. As he walked away, the sky deepened into twilight. The desert cooled, the wind carrying whispers across the sand. She tilted her head back, staring at the stars as they blinked awake, one by one. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself wonder. Not about orders, not about missions, not about the next objective. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, her brother had been right. That staying wasn't just about survival. It was about refusing to let the world push her into silence. She stayed, and tonight, one boy was alive because of it. But deep down she knew this choice would echo. Choices always did. And the echo was only beginning. Why was it so quiet now that it was all over? The airfield was silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Floodlights still cast long shadows across the cracked tarmac. A few stray papers fluttered in the breeze, remnants of maps and mission notes left behind. But the voices were gone. The chaos was gone. The war for her was finally over. She stood at the edge of the runway, boots dusty, hands trembling, staring at the horizon as if waiting for someone who would never arrive. The ache in her chest was not from exhaustion, though her body screamed with it. It was from something heavier, something final. They had pushed her aside. They had told her she wasn't meant to lead, wasn't meant to last. But history had not asked for permission. It had carved her name into its pages anyway, though the ink came at a cost she wasn't ready to admit. She remembered the faces, the laughter around the campfires, the shaky confessions made in whispers before dawn, men who hid their fear behind jokes, women who clung to scraps of letters from home, promising they'd see their children again. Some of those promises had been broken. Some still might be. And she carried all of them like stones in her chest. Her commander's words echoed faintly in memory. Service is not about being remembered. It's about remembering why you served. At the time, it had sounded like something from a book, something distant. But now, standing alone, she finally understood. The mission had demanded everything. Her patience, her silence, her courage, her heart. And though no one would see the scars she carried inside, she knew they were there, etched into her like invisible metals. A soft drizzle began to fall, cooling the dust on her skin, streaking the dirt on her face. She didn't wipe it away. She let the rain blur everything, the lights, the past, the grief. Somewhere in that blur was the truth. She had stepped into history, not because she wanted glory, but because she refused to stay silent when silence meant defeat. Behind her, the last transport's engines roared to life. Soldiers boarded quietly, their footsteps heavy with fatigue. A medic paused beside her, offering a nod, small, respectful, unspoken. She returned it but said nothing. Words didn't matter anymore. As the aircraft lifted, its lights fading into the night sky, she realized this chapter was closing. Not neatly, not cleanly, but with the ragged edges of real life, where victories always cost too much, and where survival was sometimes the only triumph left. She took one last step forward, her boots sinking into the soft mud by the runway. She felt the weight of everything she had endured, but also the quiet dignity of knowing she had not broken, even when the world had tried to bend her. No speeches, no medals, no applause, just the silence of the night, the hum of distant engines, and the steady rhythm of her breath. And in that silence, a truth settled deep inside her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She turned, walking back toward the empty barracks, her shadow stretching long and solitary across the floodlit ground. The storm clouds shifted above her, parting just enough to reveal a pale strip of moonlight. It followed her like a quiet witness, a reminder that though history might not remember her name, it would always remember her service. And she would carry that truth, not as a burden, but as the only reward that mattered.